that the questions I get most frequently from clients still center around, are we going to be able to find a house to buy? We're looking online and we see them selling. What do I do? And we can't reiterate more strongly that working with an agent that has a good, aggressive plan to represent you as a buyer is so invaluable when you're in a tight market where things are tending to sell. I can tell you that I asked the listing agents, and there were two of them I talked to because they were deciding between two houses. At the end of my conversation with them, how often they get called before somebody submits an offer. And they said, rarely, if ever. And what was interesting is the one that we ended up writing on, the listing agent called me after we wrote and we submitted. He said, I think we're just going to accept it. Now, isn't that interesting?
I'm surprised that he didn't tell you that he had multiple offers.
Well, you know, what's interesting is in the community that they're in, there's enough houses, and the days on market are closer to 50, 60 days. So they had 37 showings on this house. But it's also the time of year. If this was in the middle of May and June, we probably would have been in multiple offers. So there is that supply and demand that fluctuates based on it. But what's interesting is, because I could counsel, and all I did was relay what the listing agent said. Here's what I asked him, here's what he said. And I said, well, let's talk about what we think we need to do. And their take was, well, rather than go back and forth 4 times, let's just see how close we can come and what we can live with. And that's not what the average agent does. And so you might lose a property, like you said, because who's to say that another contract wouldn't come in this week? If we're in the middle of countering back and forth, we could potentially lose that house. Instead, we're worrying about logistics for scheduling a inspection, not trying to figure out how to wring a couple $1,000s out of a seller and potentially lose a house.
I like the way you handled that, because reaching out to the selling agent is probably one of the things that distinguishes an average agent from a above average agent. Most people just try to get people to the table and sign paperwork. Taking that extra step, in my opinion, of calling first before they went to the table really increases the chances of the deal getting done.
Well, it's certainly been my experience that it makes all the difference in the world. And, you know, we didn't have this as a specific question this week, but I just want to keep stressing this, that if you ask the potential buyer agent, and first of all, you have to hire a buyer agent if you want to have any kind of reliable process. Those buyers who think that they can negotiate directly with listing agents when there's potentials for multiple offers are really risking that they're not going to get to buy the house. It's their first choice. And then in addition to that, you need an agent that has experience in this market that will go through the process. And just make sure, like we've talked about previously, don't coach your agent to say, do you call the listing agent? Because 99 times, 10 times, they're going to say, what, Perry? They're going to say yes. They're just going to tell you because they're like, you know, because I've told buyers this. I said, you can ask agents, well, do you do this? And 9 times out of 10, they're just going to say yes because they think that's what you want to hear. And they're not used to buyers asking them any kind of questions, so it kind of takes them back. I think it's much better, like we've talked about. And if I was interviewing Perry, I would say, tell me about your process before we write an offer. Let's say we've picked a house. Tell me about what happens between when I say I'd like to write an offer on 123 Main Street, and now you're ready to submit the offer. And let the agent tell you what they do. Do they pull comparables? Do they talk to the listing agent? Do they advise you? And do they potentially even push back and say, I wouldn't ask for that. Here's why. It's up to you to decide. But this is what works. This doesn't work based on experience, versus somebody who's so excited to write an offer. They just are all over the place, and then they put you at risk. You look at it this way. You and I do a lot of transactions per year. A buyer potentially is going to buy a house anywhere from once in every 7 years to once or twice in a lifetime. It has huge implications for them, and I always find it interesting that if they were going to give Edward Jones or another broker $250,000 or $200,000 or $150,000, they would do a lot more due diligence than they do when they're picking an agent.
Absolutely.
I just find it very interesting. Don't you?
It does. It's a strange phenomenon.
Absolutely. Well, Perry, episode 12 is done. I don't know whether I'm going to get to see you on Wednesday night for the presidential debate, but it should be interesting. We'll have stuff to talk about, I'm sure, no matter what, next week. I appreciate your time, and we'll talk to you. I'll either see you on Wednesday or we'll talk to you next week.